would love to take roll. Laverne Villalobos is on her way here. She'll be here a little bit late. So Trustee Brodel here. Trustee Patel here. Oh. We're out of practice in front of people.
They're so similar. The last name is so similar.
Trustee Burkina here. Trustee Doggett here.
Right, the district digitally records the audio portion of the meetings. All recordings are kept in the superintendent's office for 30 days and are available during that time for inspection by members of the public on district equipment without charge. Trustee Bradal, would you like to do the pledge?
Yes.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Trustee Jones, you do the land acknowledgement.
Sure. The Pacifica School District acknowledges that we gather on the unceded ancestral homelands of the Ramaytush Ohlone people. As guests, we humbly extend our gratitude to the Ramaytush Ohlone elders and community. We recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland, and we affirm their sovereign rights as First Peoples. As the original stewards of this land, the Ramaytush Ohlone understand the interconnectedness of all things and the importance of maintaining harmony with nature. Likewise, Pacifica School District commits to teaching our school community how to be responsible stewards of this land.
Thank you. All right, speakers wishing to address the board, please complete a request card with your name, address and item number, and submit it to the board. You will be called on to address the board. You may speak up to 3 minutes. And those virtual speakers wishing to address the board on agenda items, please submit your first and last name and the agenda item you'd like to speak on in the Q&A area of the webinar. Please do not submit comments or questions in the Q&A area. You'll be called on to address the board. Your microphone will be unmuted and you may speak for up to 3 minutes. After you have spoken, your microphone will be muted. So we have in person.
Sure, let's start with in person. Ms. Nicole Sayers.
Go ahead, Brenda.
Yeah.
Make it formal. Hello. My name is Nicole Sayers, and I am the lead behaviorist in the Pacifica School District. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the district for allowing School Services of California to conduct a study of our special education program. I think they did a thoughtful job, and their findings and recommendations are thorough. The one thing I did not see in the study was the need for a specific space in a K-8 school to serve students who need a social, emotional setting. This is a place where students who are unable to focus in the classroom go to calm down, practice calming strategies, and be successful when things We had a class similar to this a couple of years ago at our middle school. It was taught by a teacher who incorporated art, music, social emotional learning, and academics into the classroom. The teacher and the class were supported by 2 paraprofessionals, our behavior team, as well as the other service providers that were required per student IEPs. During the 3 years that we had this special class, only 1 student was recommended and sent to a non-public school. The program, called WAVES, was a success. Now, more than ever, we are serving students who would benefit from a special social emotional space. It could be managed by a credentialed teacher, or it might be managed by a licensed counselor. It would benefit the district more if we could reopen a program in a K-8 setting so we could serve younger students as well as middle schoolers. It could be a place where students who require social emotional type of learning and environment could attend. If we do not consider reopening a social emotional learning opportunity, I feel we will end up sending more students to non-public schools at a cost of well over $100,000 a year per student. As stated by the School Services of California study, quote, "The staff in our district are hardworking and dedicated to the students they serve and show great care for their students and the district," unquote. This is the magic that we want for our students, and it's right here in our Pacifica School District. I ask this district to support our social emotional learners here at home by providing the safe, calm, and soothing environment that they deserve. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. This is unusual to ask this question, but do you know what WAVES stood for?
Can I refer to Jen?
Achieved by valuing emotional
Right.
wellness achieved by valuing emotional support.
Got it. Yeah. We have Sarah Benavides. Carly, you're gonna elevate her?
I don't have access to do that.
You sure don't. Okay, here you go. Hang on, Sarah. Oh, there we go. Sarah, your sound is turned on. Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. I wanted to speak about the SPED part. Can I do that now?
Please.
Okay, thank you. As you said, my name is Sarah Benavides. I have 2 kids at Palomar, one in special education for the last 7 years.
Our special education program has so much potential, but it seems that the district is taking a different path. Our kids need consistency and structure within this program to develop self-confidence and the skills they need to succeed. With continued disruption in staff, my child and other children in the program whose parents don't know they have a voice are not getting this. These SPED teachers become part of our lives. We communicate with these teachers constantly. They help our kids in ways that only they can understand where that need is. They support and foster their growth and give them confidence. Our kids who spend many hours per week one-on-one building a loving, trusting, compassionate environment learn to lean into this and progress. It's more than a 10-month relationship. It's year after year, every single day, pushing and pulling, giving, finding that sweet spot where they can teach our children how to learn. It takes time and consistency to get there. My 11-year-old son credits Mr. B, his first special ed teacher, with teaching him how to read in 1st grade. Much later than his peers, I will add, he gave my son confidence and showed him that he will be there for him. But then he left to another district. But then we started working with his current SPED teacher. It took a while for my child to build that same relationship with her, but now he trusts her. He actually loves her. She has given my child her heart and soul in this job and has taught my child skills that I would never be able to provide at home and that a classroom teacher teaching 30 other students just can't offer. On Friday, he will be heartbroken when he learns that she is leaving now too. And you know what? I don't blame her. I see her grossly overworked, stressed out, exhausted, with no end in sight. Enough is enough. We need these absolutely amazing humans in our district for our kids. We need higher salaries, training, and most of all, consistent staff to build a solid foundation for our most vulnerable population. We currently have 9 SPED teachers in our district and only 2 are permanent employees. The other 7 are contractors. I can't even exchange emails with these contractors. Please make the district somewhere our teachers want to stay. Give them more, show them we value them. We need to retain these gems, these givers. These SPED teachers are special, super teachers, full to the brim of patience, compassion, love, and we just let them go. We need to do better. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sarah. Let's see, there we go. Okay. Ready to get started? All right.
Special education study.
Okay, let me kick things off. First of all, I want to thank everyone for being here today. This is a topic that is near and dear to all of our hearts, and we would not have asked for this study or commissioned this study unless we wanted to get better at what we did. And we appreciate everybody's involvement in this. We had some nice engagement from our families, from our staff. Much of this came at the time of Omicron, when people were stretched very, very thin. That cycle is almost right back where we are, is with high levels of COVID and people being stressed and having many challenges on their plate. So one of the things I just want to acknowledge is that with the recent shootings in Buffalo and in Texas, is that the lack of emotion or enthusiasm that you may be hearing from people is really exhaustion. It's not that we're not engaged in this, but there is a lot on people's plate. So we recognize that there may be more emotion that comes into this study. But if you're feeling that from our aspect that we're a little flat, it's really exhaustion, not a lack of engagement in this. So let me, I am proud of the work that our district is doing and recognize that there's really a significant level of work, years worth of work. But there are some things that we will get started on right away. So we feel very fortunate to have been able to engage school services and some of the best in this work. I actually started while Anjanette Peltier was a associate superintendent in San Mateo County Office of Ed, and I said, how do we start to learn about how we get better? And she actually suggested that we work with School Services of California. And then she went to go work for School Services of California. So we're really fortunate that she knows San Mateo County, knows our district a wee bit, but we were engaged with, wanted to engage with School Services of California before Anjanette even worked there, because they're really the gold standard of programmatic feedback. So allow me to introduce, here physically in the room is Anjanette Peltier, who is maybe not School Services' newest member, but but the junior member on this team. And then coming to us from Zoom is Suzanne Speck, who is an executive vice president for special education. So they're going to co-present, one in-house and one on Zoom. So take it away.
Good evening. Thank you, Superintendent Olson. Appreciate that introduction. Can you hear me all right? All right, great. Well, I did not know when we actually stole Anjanette away from San Mateo County that she was already out there generating work for the company. So that was totally coincidental. But we've had the good fortune over the years to work together on a number of projects in San Mateo County, and was just honored to have her join our team at School Services so that she can provide the level of support to districts across the state that I know she's provided to districts there in San Mateo County for many years. So thank you, Anjanette, and it's my pleasure to the board for inviting us to be a part of this really important journey. I know that this is just a first step in that journey, and we're just honored to be a part of that. We're going to go ahead and get started, and I just want to let you know that we are completely comfortable taking questions at any time. And so I know it's hard for me because I can't necessarily read the room. So I'm going to lean on some of you, and particularly Anjanette, to cut me off if there's some questions and I need to slow down and pause on a particular slide. But we hope you'll feel comfortable doing so. Okay, ready to go? All right. So I just wanted to start really with a statement of our purpose and really why we were there, and the really methodology that we followed in conducting this study. And as Dr. Olson already said, We weren't sent by the state. We weren't there to do a compliance review, for example. We were really there as guests of the district. And like so many districts across the state of California, we know that the cost of providing special education programs to your students there in Pacifica is a concern. But it's not the only concern and probably not the most important concern. The concern for the district's ability to provide high quality programs for your students with disability was a primary driver in this work and in providing this report and recommendations as you move forward. We know that the cost of providing these services to your students with disability is significant, and really the gap between the dollars that are provided both by the federal government and the state have just not kept pace with rising cost. And so that plays a significant role. There is some good news in terms of special education funding. We have seen some significant increases to the state's base rate for funding special education, and that certainly can help not only Pacifica, but districts across the state as they also wrestle with those rising costs and that growing gap between the money that's provided for this purpose and the actual cost of serving your students locally. In terms of our study scope and methodology, we really started with a review of some data. Data can help illuminate areas of concern for us in this work and ensure that when we come to the district to engage with district staff, to engage with school site staff, with your special educators, general educators, and others that we interviewed, we were really being able to focus on those areas of potential concern. We looked at not only financial information, we looked at information about students and programs, we looked at caseload data, and we gathered comparative data from districts in the region that are similar to you, so that we could provide a comparative analysis of both cost and staffing levels. We did come out and interview and spent some time not only talking to people, but visiting schools and visiting some of your special education programs, which I know, at least for me, and I won't speak for Ann Jeanette, is such important work and probably my favorite part of doing special education studies, because I am a special educator. I started my career in schools more years ago than I'll admit to, as a special education teacher, a special education administrator, and a special education parent. So getting out and meeting and talking to people, I enjoy very much, but getting to see those kiddos was a joy for me. We also conducted both parent surveys and staff surveys and had a very positive response from both parents and staff, and in many ways confirmed, or what they shared confirmed, many of the findings and recommendations that we'll share with you tonight. The organization of the report that we produced following our field work and this data review and analysis is organized into these 5 major areas. We took a look at organizational effectiveness, which is essentially what are the structures and the staffing, the policies and procedures, the communication structures, the leadership that really supports your special education programs. And so we have a section that speaks to organizational effectiveness, and we'll share some major findings with you this evening. We, of course, look at special education revenues and expenditures. How is the district comparing, again, to districts that look like you? And then, of course, we looked at special education cost drivers. So really what drives cost in special education? And as in most things in your district, the cost really is driven by the number of employees that you hire to provide these services to your students. And of course, behind your levels of staffing is really the number of students that you're serving and the types of disabilities, and to the extent that they are either high, medium, or low cost disability areas. We also provided a comparative analysis of special education staffing so that you have some sense of how you're staffing on a per student basis to those like districts. And then finally, we conducted an IEP compliance review, and Jeanette will talk about that at the end of our presentation this evening. But we had the opportunity to really review the individualized education program files of students and really provide what I hope will be some meaningful recommendations in that area as well. I'll just pause there. Any questions so far?
Nope.
All right, great. All I need is Jeanette to give me a thumbs up, thumbs down, or shake your head yes or no, because that's what I see on the screen right now. Great. Thanks, Jeanette. So before we dig in and really talk about our findings in those 5 major areas, really want to just take a moment to think about special education funding and kind of the trends over the last few years here in California. So this chart provides data. It's based on all school districts in the state, whether they're a unified district, an elementary or high school districts. The data here is really based on averages of all districts in the state of California. And it shows special education spending and the sources of funds that really support the programs that are provided statewide for students with disabilities. So the federal funding, you'll see in the blue, state funding is in the yellow. Oh, I'm sorry, federal is green. It's really hard on my screen, it's tiny. And the local funding, so that's your contribution to your special education programs, is in the darker blue. And so if we look at this data, really, what does it tell us? Well, pretty quickly, you can see that your contribution to providing the revenue required to support your programs for students with disability is going up, right? While the share that the federal funding provides is going down, as is the case for state. And so it just really illustrates the point I made earlier about that gap between the cost and the dollars that are provided by the state and the federal government to serve our students with disability continues to grow. Now, this chart does not take into consideration that during the 2021-22 school year, we did see an increase in base funding for special education, which has statewide really started to change this picture and providing at least some additional dollars. And some LEAs are able to reduce their local contribution to their special education programs. And with projected increase in that base rate for 2022-23, that is likely to continue at least in the year and hopefully years ahead. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeanette, unless there's some questions. Are there some questions?
Yep, one
Yes,
question.
one question.
Right, I'll go back.
Is the decrease in funding because of an increase in the cost of special education? Like, for example, is the government giving less and less money each year, or did the cost keep going up significantly that the contribution by the local funding had to go up? I'm just curious to see why it went from basically 50% to 70%.
Do you want me to get that?
That's a great question, and I'll answer the first part and then I'll hand it over to Anjanette because it's really kind of a two-part answer. And first, I just want to make the point that the federal government, when they passed the first, when they passed the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, really promised to provide 40% of the cost of operating special education programs, and they have always fell short in terms of that, of meeting that commitment. So that is important to state here. Certainly the federal contribution fluctuates slightly over time, but that's really not the driver here. And so I'll turn over to Anjanette, who's in the room and can probably provide a much more eloquent answer to that question.
Yeah, so it's actually a really good question, and your part two of your own question was really your answer. Overall, we have seen year over year small increases in federal funding. Some years it's been a larger small increase, and some years it's been a smaller small increase. We just came out of a 4-year cycle where every year we had a very small increase in special ed funding, and then this past year we got a much larger increase in federal funding. So the reason that band is shrinking, actually you saw it grew a little bit because our federal funding actually went up enough to have an impact. But the real driver is that the cost of special education programs continues to grow and grow and grow. And part of that is some of the reasons that we're here. You are seeing some of those impacts of needing to use contracted service providers instead of employees, that students need more services, more intensive services.
So that's just an increase of cost that's
Yes,
making
overall.
that gap get bigger and bigger.
Yes, yes.
And it's salaries mostly, or is it more students need more services? Are we seeing an increase in students needing services? It just...
Yeah, well, we're seeing a couple of trends across the United States and across California. We are seeing more students with high-cost needs in enrolled programs. We're seeing higher levels of incidence of high-cost need disabilities. For example, students with autism often need a broader range of services to be successful, rather than a student who might just need speech services. So we're seeing more students have a broader range of needs, and that really has driven cost in many places. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about enrollment trends. So I'm going to move us on to the next slide. So one of the ways that special education funding comes is based on our enrollment. So that's been actually another driver of local costs increasing, because in many places our overall enrollment has been decreasing, while the number of students with disabilities who need services has been increasing. And our funding comes based on our total enrollment amount. So when you have your enrollment is steady or growing, you're getting more revenue. And so if you have more students with disabilities, you have more revenue for them. Even when your dollar amount per pupil goes up, as it has in the last 3 years for California, if you lose enough enrollment, then your funding actually will stay stable, because your number of pupils has gone down while your students with disabilities population count has gone up. And that is a trend that we're seeing across many parts of California. So this is Pacifica's chart that shows that you have had some very stable numbers of your percentage of students with disabilities. And we also see there the statewide average of students with disabilities. And basically what this is showing is that as enrollment, you had some enrollment increases, and as you had enrollment increases, your special education percentage of students actually was fairly stable. You can see that between 2010 and 2015. And then you can see that you had a couple of years where you were sort of back and forth between 3,100 students and 3,000 students, and up to 3,150 and down to 3,010. You had a little bit of variation, but what you did see was a steady increase in the percentage of your student population that were students with disabilities.
I think that was on the next slide.
You were on this slide?
We're on the one up there.
Sorry, I'm not sure what's... This one? Oh, there we go.
There you go.
Okay, So, yes, so this one actually has your enrollment numbers. And so what we are seeing for you, as we're seeing across the state of California, is that your enrollment has fluctuated some, but you are in a little bit of a downward ADA enrollment overall. And at the same time, your number of students with disabilities has risen steadily increasing. You actually had, it was kind of we were doing this study at a I'll say unfortunate time, in that we were looking at a prior year data because your data for the current year had not been yet certified. And so you did have a 2-year period where your student with disability population came down just a little bit. You had a lot of students who were receiving speech services who were finished with those speech services successfully and were exited from that program. But in the past year and a half, as we've returned from distance learning and are back with in-person learning, you've had an actually fairly dramatic spike in the number of students with disability. So although it's not on this chart, when we look at your student information system, we see that you've had an increase of almost 60 students in the past year, and as students with disabilities have been identified as you assess them for eligibility as they've returned to in-person learning. So while you've had a decrease in enrollment, your pupil count of students with IEPs has increased. So I'm just going to go back 1 second and say, one of the things that's really important to note is that as a district gets smaller, it doesn't actually mean that there's less work for the team members that are there. It's really hard to sometimes really play the game of how many people per adult is a great ratio, because at some point you can't get rid of more adults even when you have fewer students. And when you grow so rapidly, it's sometimes hard to project and have space in all of your programs for those students. And so hiring in advance is sometimes a little more difficult than when your population is more stable. So one of the first areas, as Suzanne said, that we talked about was organizational effectiveness. And this is really an analysis of how functions of the role are being assigned and completed, whether they're meeting the needs of their customers, which are both the staff and the students and the parent community, so not both, all, and that really measure how effective in terms of the outcomes you're looking to get, which in this case is student outcomes, are you receiving from your program. And so as we had someone quote us, the staff here are so fantastic. They're great, right? You have loyal people who are working very hard with really great programs. There's a lot of positive outcomes that we can see in the students' IEPs, and as we're looking at the data that's being produced that's showing the progress they're making on goals. There's a lot of partnership and collaboration amongst your staff, which is fantastic. And you have some new people and you have some people who are contracted service providers, but even those employees are really, really focused on and dedicated to the outcomes for your students. So that's really, really nice. This job has been a combined job. It's a combo job for this year. So your director is doing both special education and student services. That's not a new thing for this district. You've had a shared HR position, you've had a shared student services position, you've had a shared ed services kind of position. You've tried a whole bunch of different things to work based on the skills and experience of your prior directors. And you do have an experienced special education leader now, which is great. But in the time of COVID, there is so much going on that it really feels like the amount of time and the amount of work that's required to handle all of those functions is really sort of filling up more than each day has available in terms of hours. And so that in itself, every new director who comes into a district has to set new relationships and set communication protocols and develop practices and procedures. And for this director in this year, even with his experience, that there's so many things to do that are brand new. Contact tracing and testing and ensuring that people have masks and PPE. And there's just so many things on the student services side that your staff is actually calling out for more time with the director. And there's just not enough hours in the day for that time to be devoted. So for us, when we look at many other kinds of systems and programs, a system where there is a need for additional special education expertise in the field with the staff at the school sites for supporting the principals, for ensuring that creative programs like some of the programs that you have here with your behaviorist program, that really needs some additional bodies to do some of that work. And so one of the things that we feel could be really effective for you is additional special education expertise, such as coordinators or special education directors. And you actually right now have enough work to maybe even do one for each function of those departments, student services and special ed. And that could allow your director a little more time to do some of that higher level management work and to ensure that those functions are completed. And you have some very interesting possibilities here in your district and in the room to add some of that special ed expertise depending on what kinds of choices you made about what your priorities were in that area. We also, there we go. There's also a real clear message from the teachers that we interviewed, from your site administrators, and in the surveys from your general education staff, that everyone feels like they need more training. And training is such a conundrum for special education and for us in education right now, because you need time to do that well. You need time to spend with people, and yet you still need someone to supervise your students. You can't take whole swaths of your staff away for days while your students are alone in the classroom. So we know that is a commitment. But your staff are saying they have areas where they would like to feel stronger. They would like to know more about behavioral supports. They would like to be better at implementing your MTSS program, your UDL, the strategies and resources that you've purchased for them. Many of them really appreciate how many tools they have in their classroom, but they don't have time to either learn how to use those tools well or to integrate them together, is what they're saying. So they're happy to have tools, and they feel bad that the tools are lying fallow because they don't have time to figure out how to use them well. So we, of course, would recommend that you increase those training opportunities. When you have veteran educators saying, I want more training, that's an opportunity. And we would recommend that you provide that training in a multiple varieties. There's so many more online trainings now than there used to be because of our experience with distance learning. And there's opportunities for both general education, special education, and even some of your classified staff members who can be elevated. You've already done so with your behavioral staff. You have some tools that you can elevate the skills of your classified staff to possibly support that MTSS implementation as well. And we also feel like as part of that training that also really could benefit from just a systemic-wide review of the policies, procedures, and processes that you have. Forms, for example, can really remove the need for people to make their own independent decisions on things that you have decided as a district are your standard of practice. So, for example, SST process, you don't have that many schools, but you have a form for each kind of school, right? So it would be nice to have some standardization there. And there are other important information communication processes that need to occur that might benefit from more standardization and a protocol of both policy, procedure, and practice, including onboarding. As you know, you have had a lot of contractors come in, or you may have new staff, and integrating them into your system with quality onboarding is really important. And right now, especially the contracted service providers are not receiving a whole lot of here's the Pacifica way. They're receiving here's the Pacifica computer. So it would be lovely for them to become more embedded in your fabric. Let's see if I can get it to go without one more. Okay. Somehow, every time I touch it, it doesn't want me to.
Number 10, right?
There we go. Okay. So that also brings us to sort of how would you pay for these things? Because what are your revenues and expenditures? And you have this interesting juxtaposition of expenditures. So overall, you are spending less on employees than comparable districts. But that's not because you're not having educators, it's because you're spending more on contracted service providers. You've been really fortunate. Some of the contract service providers you have, I heard a parent speak to that, are superstars. You've got some great people doing work for you that are contractors. But often, very often, maybe always, contracted services are more expensive than employees. And they tend to leave at the end of that year. Whereas an employee becomes more and more integrated into your programs and into your community. So that spending on contracted service providers is smart to do when that's who you can get. And when you need an educator in the classroom, you are lucky to have high quality contracted people that your director has been able to secure. But we really want to continue to encourage you to be working on that recruitment and retention work, because contractors rarely improve the capacity of your system. And you want your system to grow in overall capacity and outcome over the course of several years, instead of having that capacity leave at the end of every contracted period. So we would love to see more employees, and there's lots of things that might influence that. And we also think that one of the things we found was that with the new director and with so many demands on times, it's been harder for some of the leadership team members to have regular planning meetings to talk about some of these issues. So even when the business department is not primarily responsible for the contracts that your director is executing for those service providers, it really would be best practice for them to be talking about the request for those services, the contracts for those services, and how that's going to impact the budget overall. And so we would recommend really a planful organizational scheduling of those regular conversations. And even if what you do is say, we don't have much to talk about today, instead of we need to find time to talk, and then having 2 weeks pass because of the number of duties that have happened in every single day. So we'd love to see that improved budget planning and expenditure tracking, and making sure that your contracted service providers are really part of that learning the Pacifica way. As I said, they're great, and you've been very fortunate, but they might have been even better if they had learned the Pacifica way with support, or you might have had different decisions you could have made about what their contracts would look like if someone had spent more time onboarding them to your system. Any questions about all of that? I'm just going to keep going until people have questions. Okay, so then I'm actually going to turn that back over to Suzanne.
Thank you.
All right, were there questions? No?
No.
All right, great. So in this section, we'll talk about the special education cost drivers. But before we do, I really wanted to acknowledge that the special education department does not control all of the costs associated with operating programs for students with disability. That is really influenced by the extent to which the district has an early warning system that includes interventions and supports to students both academically, socially, emotionally, and behaviorally, so that if they're
She froze. Suzanne, you froze.
meaningful interventions that will help to keep them out of special education. I'm sorry, can you hear me? All right, I just got a warning that said my internet is unstable. So if I lose you, Anjanette will just have to carry on. And I think she has the presentation if for some reason I lose you, and I apologize. So the early interventions and supports that we're talking about can go a long way to helping reduce referrals to special education, thereby reducing special education costs. And so we just wanted to really acknowledge that. It's really important to know that the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and the Every Student Succeed Act requires that all students who are referred to special education first had the opportunity with supports and interventions to be successful in a general education setting. And so you, like every school district across the state and nation, have that obligation to make sure that you do have an early warning system and that you can provide supports that are intended to help keep kids in general education. So I want to talk a little bit about multi-tiered systems of support. Those early interventions or early warning systems and mini LEAs are based on a multiple tiered systems of support. MTSS, which we often refer to it as, is really designed to help provide those targeted interventions to students who are struggling, again, academically, socially, emotionally, or behaviorally, and allows an LEA to intervene quickly. MTSS really focuses on the whole child, meaning that it does support students in all of those areas. And probably the first and I would argue the most important element of MTSS is that first bubble you see here, evidence-based instruction. So what does that mean, or what does evidence-based instruction really include? Well, really what it includes is all of the materials, methods, instructional strategies that are used that have been tested and found to be effective for large groups of diverse students. So in a multi-tiered systems of support model, there are generally 3 tiers of support. And that first tier, think of it as the instructional foundation, or what you probably refer to as your core instructional program, is really provided to all students. And that ensures that all students who are struggling really receive interventions and supports that they need. And more important than likely anything else is that they've had an opportunity for best first instruction. And best first instruction, that instruction that they receive in the general education program, that foundation, that core, should aim to give every student their very best opportunity to learn standards-based grade level content and the skills the first time that they receive instruction. Tiers 1 and tiers 2 really provide more targeted and individualized supports when tier 1 supports just don't provide the support that a student needs to make the kind of progress that we would expect in a general education classroom, either with or without some supports. Multi-tiered systems of supports also include, in addition to that, best first teaching, universal screening, monitoring of progress, formative assessments, research-based interventions, and really ensure that we are tracking and monitoring students' outcomes in light of those interventions that we put in place. And only when and if they don't fail to achieve the desired result, which is instruction in the general education classroom, should students be referred to special education. In terms of MTSS and the district's early warning system or their early supports and interventions, you know, Anjanette and I would both say that we were so pleased in not only meeting and talking to people about early interventions, but really seeing them real time during our site visits. So you do have some pre-referral interventions in place, but it's important to keep in mind that the percentage of students that you're serving in special education is the highest among the comparative districts that were included in this study. And it does suggest that those pre-referral interventions are not really successfully reducing referrals to special education. And so, why is that? Well, some of the reasons why could be that your interventions are not consistently implemented with fidelity across the district. That doesn't mean that people aren't well-intentioned. They're doing the very best they can with the time, the resources, and the training that they have. But there needs to be a more thoughtful implementation of these early interventions district-wide, so that regardless of where a student attends school, they have an equal opportunity to receive those supports that they need to be successful in the general education program. And so implementing MTSS district-wide, ensuring that the district provides, again, the time, the resources, the training that teachers and other educational support staff so that they can provide what students need. So did I accidentally skip? No, I did. I am having the same problem that Ann Jeanette did. Every time I click, I advance 2 slides. I apologize for that. An important part of that MTSS model is every school having a student study team, a group of professionals who come together, who are monitoring students' progress, who are working not only at their school, but with parents to provide students with those needed supports. Again, whether it's academic support, support in the areas of social emotional development and or behavior, and in some cases, really helping students ensure that they get to school. You do have MTSS across the district, although they're not implemented consistently in terms of who participates, the level of parent involvement, consistent forms, processes, and procedures. And so we would recommend that you create some consistency where student study teams are concerned. And again, that you would implement and monitor MTSS district-wide with fidelity. So let's talk a little bit more about special education cost drivers, and want to just talk briefly about compliance monitoring. The state of California, like every state in the nation, has an obligation to really monitor to what extent every school district is implementing the requirements of the IDEA. In California, there's a number of monitoring activities and compliance or performance indicators that are measured by the state, and that LEAs must report whether or not they are meeting the state's target in each of those performance indicators. One of those indicators is the least restrictive environment, and it is the one performance indicator or compliance area where the district is not meeting its targets as measured by the state. So the chart you see here really shows the percentage of your students with disabilities who are spending at least 80% of their day in the general education classroom. Now, we typically talk about general education classrooms. The state uses the phrase regular classrooms, but when you see that term, we're referring to the general education classroom. And the blue bars show those percentages where you are in the district, and then you'll see that light blue line, which actually is the statewide target rate in terms of the percentage of students who, again, are in your general ed classrooms for at least 80% of the day. As you'll notice, that statewide target is moving. It is a moving target, and it is trending upwards. And until 2019 and 20, the district was meeting that statewide target rate. And then in 2019, 2020, it did not meet that target. And so that's a particular area of concern for the district and does suggest that more can be done to ensure that students, even students with disabilities who need some services outside of their general education classroom, to the maximum extent possible, are receiving those supports in general education. And so that is an area of concern, and we make some recommendations related to developing and implementing some inclusive practices across the district to really ensure that you're meeting that statewide target rate, and that all students, including students with disabilities, have that opportunity for best first instruction. Implementing inclusive practices can be challenging. It requires a real commitment on the part of the district and investment of resources into providing training for not special educators, but really primarily for general education teachers, for site administrators, and for others across the district, again, to ensure that all students are succeeding in the general education setting, and even those who require special education services are receiving them in the general education classroom to the maximum extent possible. And with that, unless there's any questions, I'm going to turn it over to Anjanette to talk about IEP compliance.
Laverne, did you have a question?
No, I was just hoping my class. And we are almost finished too. So the last section that we did on the IEP, on the study, was to review. We pulled about 30 files to be reviewed across your system to look at IEP compliance. And as someone who has spent a large part of my career focusing on IEP compliance, I have to say that I was really impressed with lots of the things that I see. You guys handled the transition to distance learning and using online documentation really well. It's clear that many of the IEPs were held on time as best they could be, and that as soon as you returned to in-person learning, that there was a lot of IEPs that were held quite quickly. There are a lot of really great things I see in the IEP goals, in the consideration of the IEP services, the language and the assessment reports that is used when we're talking about eligibility. Lots of really nice, strong evidence of quality practice and focused on meaningful educational benefit for students in their IEPs. So that's really, really, really nice to see. There were, as with any interaction that involves human beings and 40 pages of paper, opportunities for small mistakes and or missing information. And part of that may be due to the transfer to the online system. So there were, in the files that we did find some small variance in dates, or something missing in a line, or parent notes that said the parent agreed and consented, but no copy of a signature page. So those things, for the most part, have not hampered your team. You've had a director who's really spent a year developing and re-engaging that parental trust in your community, and you have not had an onslaught of compliance complaints or settlement agreement needs or unhappy parents as they've come back to learning. So that's also really nice. But long term, those small mistakes can be the little crack opening to future or potential challenges. So we always want to say, the federal government says that every child deserves an IEP that has 0 mistakes. And that really is always our goal. So those small mistakes could have significant consequences if it causes someone to doubt other parts of the IEP because of a simple data clerical error, or if you have someone asks for a copy of a file and you're unable to produce what you're legally mandated to produce in the timeline that you're responsible to do that. So I know that your director has had this on his list of things to do, but quality training for all staff, especially when you have new staff or contractors, about those compliance metrics on an IEP, ensuring that every single box is checked and I dotted and T crossed is actually really important as the foundation for special education. So part of that training we would recommend is that ensuring your staff are aware of the procedures, practices, and protocols for IEP files. The areas where we found minor inconsistencies are listed here, calculating that time in general education. So we just heard from Suzanne that your indicator you're not meeting is how many students are in general education for 80% of the time. And one of the things I found was that it might be a math error, not a physical student in the setting error. So if that's something that you could correct, that would be great. We also saw some missing components, inconsistent dates, missing evidence of progress on goals. That was the number one thing that I found that I spoke with John about. Every student with an IEP is entitled to receive regular progress updates on their goals and objectives the same way and at the same time as students receive progress reports or grades from the regular classroom. Your teachers say they're doing it, your principal said it's being done, but there's no documentation of that in the files that I could view. So somewhere we need to make sure that that copy is getting filed so that someone who asks for a copy of the file would see that. My guess is your parents said they were getting those updates in the survey. So it's probably happening, but there's a missing piece where we can't prove that we did the thing that we're probably spending a lot of time doing. So we want to make sure we give ourselves that credit by making sure we have that proof. And so one of the things that we, all really strong IEP teams or departments do is periodic compliance checks, where you pull a couple of files, you look through them, you see what patterns am I seeing, where are some of the errors happening, so that you can hit those things a little earlier, remind people with a memo, don't forget, this is super important. And so that may need to be a new practice for the district and for site teams. And there are some great resources in San Mateo County. Your SELPA is very strong. I'm not there anymore, but they are amazing. And so they have all sorts of trainings and resources and online little mini tutorials about how to do all of those things. It's not something that you would have to spend money or a substantial amount of time to make happen. And with that, we're at the end of our broad stroke summary.
All right. What questions might you have?
So this is that, I have a couple of questions on the report, but one question that I have is a little bit kind of disconnected from the report, so maybe it's Dr. Olson for you. Do we have an understanding of the outcomes and the achievement gap of students with disabilities? To a certain extent, it's hard for me to look at the inputs into our special education program without knowing the outcomes in depth, because let's say we spent the most, but we had the greatest outcomes. I mean, I would be proud of that, you know?
And that would be a great outcome that we're not experiencing. So the only data that I can really pinpoint is our pre-COVID CASP data, and it was very much like other districts and other places through the country, is that students with disabilities are performing the worst amongst all of the student groups.
And so I guess the question is more, are the practices that we have in place, because a lot of the recommendations are around improving implementation of existing practices. Do we know that these practices are the right practices to support outcomes? Like, are we seeing the achievement gap narrow between students with and maybe this is a follow-up, but to me that's kind of a central question of, are we doing the right things? And then if we are, and we need to kind of tweak the implementation, that's wonderful. But let's say there's some big piece that we are missing.
So maybe you just asked the $1 million question, which is, we certainly don't want to make a model that's not serving kids, right? So, and I'm going to just kick this off and then I'll defer to Antoinette and Suzanne on the answer to this one. I think one place that we have to start is by strengthening our implementation of MTSS, which is based on data. So starting with a kind of common assessment for all students, and then applying treatment. So some of it is some general education instruction, and some of it may be specialized special education instruction, and then looking at what the outcomes on that as well, and then measuring that. But that is really precise data that's often very hard to measure in a special ed world. So I'm going to hand it over to the expert.
Yeah. And you're right, it's a really good question, and it is the billion-dollar question. The companies who want to sell you intervention materials all want you to believe that they have solved this problem. And the ones that you have picked have really great track records, right? So you have a lot of evidence-based practices in your classrooms, evidence-based practice materials in your classroom. The iReady system really has shown to be really effective at growing and accelerating learning, closing achievement gaps with measurable data when used with fidelity. So what does fidelity mean for that system? That means that you have dedicated time daily to focus on those things that need to be focused on, along with supplemental instruction to do things when there's some free time or as some extra time, all right? And that then has to be integrated into the other components of teaching, right? So you can't just sit me down at a computer for 20 minutes and be like, oh, we did it, we're done. You have to do the 20-minute thing, then you have to integrate those strategies into other areas of the teaching day. You have to do some supplemental things that make it enjoyable, and then you have to measure that outcome. So that's really where that implementation advice comes. They have the data that shows that when their programs are implemented in the recommended manner, that they see results. Now, can we guarantee that? We can't, because your students are not the exact students who are in their study groups or group norming groups. But across the number of places that are using systems like iReady or iReady itself, they're finding those results.
Yeah.
So then for us, what we saw was people saying, I like the iReady, I got the training, I've done the testing to find out where I'm supposed to be targeting the instruction, but I'll only be getting that on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Well, the program says it has to be done every day, right? So Tuesdays and Thursdays means it's either going to take 4 times as long, or maybe it actually doesn't work when you only do it 2 days. I don't know enough about iReady to know that. But the program says 5 days a week for 6 weeks is the way to get the results. So until you've done it with fidelity, we won't know if it's the right exact thing for your students. But I also would guess that Pacifica students are not that much different from the students who are part of the norming group and students who would benefit from that good teaching. So I hope that sort of answers.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I will say on that is, there was that article in the New York Times recently about Lucy Calkins really relooking at the curriculum that's been in schools for decades and decades based on the science of reading. And that just struck me as like, this is a program that had been given to schools and teachers as evidence-based for years and years because they saw all these things. So that's kind of where, and this isn't for Pacifica to solve, this is a bigger question. But I just kind of think about how do we keep innovating and looking for things that are working. The other question I had is, one of the things that was a recommendation around doing something a little bit differently was around developing inclusive practices in schools or in classrooms and with students with disabilities. I'm curious, what does that look like from a change in teaching? Like, is that general education and special education teachers planning together? Is it like what does that look like?
Yeah. So again, that is the answer to that question really depends on both the educators, your resource, and the time and the commitment you have to do those things. So inclusive practice or inclusive culture. Like the inclusive culture comes first with that commitment from your leadership and your site principals and your educators that everyone belongs here. That I am responsible for the learning of all the students. And that if I feel like I don't have the skills to do a thing, then I need to ask for help, get help, and figure out how to make sure that that learning occurs. Not make sure that I find another place for that learning to possibly take place, right? So that culture mindset is really that foundation. But I think when we mean inclusive practice, we really do mean that at its base, like stripped down, the research shows us that the more time students spend sitting in a room with general ed peers with a regular flow of instruction, even if none of it is targeted to their needs, the better their outcomes. That exposure to their peers, exposure to the regular flow of the curriculum, and exposure to that learning environment is better for them than a exclusionary setting where they receive targeted instruction. So that's where we have to find that balance for individual students. That's why IEPs are individualized, and also for our system. Because we know that some students need direct instruction explicitly of target skills. That is harder to do in that embedded environment. But so we have to balance the cost of what's the value of removing them from that environment to get that skill. And a real inclusive culture needs to depend on your resources and your commitment. So if you had a system where you committed to someone being in there to do that intensive intervention in that environment with any student who needed it, in addition to your student with an IEP, then you would have more students benefiting from that. But that commitment has costs, actual monetary costs, because you need to have another person in there doing some of that work. So it's both an aspirational goal and a foundational mindset, and trying to figure out how to make that work for your students is really the where you have to navigate that balance. It's really hard and impossible for me to say, because if I had my way, everybody would be included all of the time, unless we absolutely were sure that was not working for them, and that it's not been the practice in most of California schools.
I mean, it's almost reflective of the funding that you showed with when you talk about the contribution of local funding. If that goes towards more inclusionary practices, then there's less, taking students out for, a different activity.
I'll go ahead. So a couple things that stood out, and when I reflected back, really are kind of true and sort of sad a little bit, but that this is not a standalone program. And when I reflect back on my life in the school district, it often is, how are we going to go help this kid over there? Not how are we helping him or she or he in class. So, so I do, and then that kind of goes to something I've talked to Dr. Olson about a lot, is about general ed training, and especially, not to pick on any one group, but I think we really need to focus on the kindergarten through third grade, making sure those teachers are really, really helping with assessments and trying to help kids before they get over to fourth grade, fifth grade, and then now they don't know how to read, and we've got a whole nother set of problems on our hands. So I guess my question is to the general ed training is there a system or a plan that we are planning on next year of kind of having a more regular process to train some of the teachers, and getting the IPs right and getting, all these kids assessed? Do you have any plans or thoughts on it?
I don't have any easy answers to that. That's not as we wind down from the school year, but we do know that that comes right out of the study is the need to, it's not just about special ed training, it's about how do we work with general ed teachers. We know from our discussion in board meetings that we need content-specific professional development. K3 would probably be in the teaching of reading. We do know that we need a phonics program. We don't have a consistent phonics program in our schools. That would help a ton. It's not going to be the only way that we teach reading. We'll continue to use Readers and Writers Workshop for the time being, because that is extremely specific to student skills and differentiated in a way that meets students' needs. But I do think across the board, if we think about the new teachers that we've brought in the last 3 years, and their life has been upended by a pandemic, is that we haven't been focused on content teaching. We've been focused on responding. We've been focused on how to get our lessons up digitally. But I think that that's going to be very, very important. And how we use time is important. So how do we use, typically we'd like to use one Wednesday a month for professional development. We did a fair amount of that on the two topics that we really focused on this year were iReady, interpreting your iReady results, or getting good results, and then meaningful results, and interpreting the data, and how to use the iReady tools. And the other piece was around caring school communities. So I don't have any answers for like, here's the exact plan. I can say to you by August, we'll have some pretty good thoughts on how we'll use that time. The other thing is that this week 2 special ed teachers came and talked to us, and they said, you know, we'd really like to have a consistent across the district time that every special educator is meeting, so that we can make sure that that's in place. And they acknowledge that the craziness of the pandemic made all sorts of things challenging for that, but that was a request on their part. So
okay, so that's.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I do, and I think like when I didn't get involved in negotiations or anything, but like the Wednesdays, having kind of a consistent reminder throughout the whole school year is good, instead of just like one session and then it gets thrown away.
Yeah.
So the other thing is the elephant in the room is the contractors. I guess first, how many contractors have been here multiple years of the, well, let me roll back a little bit. On the chart you gave me, or gave us, I think it says
the confidential chart that we're using for negotiations.
All right. I guess I'm wondering on employee numbers. To me, it seems like we might have a little more contractors than actual employees.
We do have, so in RSP, we have more contractors than we do district employees. In special day class, I think the balance has shifted across I think there are more district employees than there are contractors.
So I guess, we don't want to get rid of any contractors that have committed to us and are staying with us and creating the continuity that we want. But I also think we should look at all the contractors that aren't providing that, and we need to do our best over the summer to try to backfill. I mean, when I did some math myself, it seemed like we could easily have at least 2 more employees in that department.
So Linda, can I just stop? I just want to be really clear, because we can make this about contractors or not contractors. Let me tell you, the almost lowest part of my superintendency is that January, when we had 5 positions unfilled. And we will never be in that position again. We can't. That represented thousands of dollars of compensatory ed that we paid out. It represents a great deal of services that kids did not get. It was a very, very low point in this district, and this room was full of people that were unhappy about those services. So we could make this about contractors or not. We are currently trying to, without revealing all the pieces of this, we are trying to negotiate compensation for our employees that will make it appealing here. We have amongst the lowest salary of any district in this county. We are a high wealth county with districts that earn $1,000 more revenue per student than we do, which represents $3 million. So I would really say in this period of time that we can talk about whether we should have contractors or not. We're going to have contractors as long as we need those services. We would absolutely love to have those people be our employees. When we have those jobs posted, we don't have people applying
Just
for
out of
them.
curiosity, I know I'm fine with the contractors for now, because I was here for the special ed craziness, I'll just call it that. the possibility of those contractors becoming employees? Is it possible, or are there contracts preventing that from
So
happening?
there are, every contract is a little different with the different agencies, but there are some people that have a no-compete clause.
Right.
There are some where there's a fee that you would pay that fee, like say it might be $30,000.
Right.
That'd be a great one-time fee to do that. We do have contractors that consider it. And then when they look at it, they might say, this doesn't pencil out for me. So that's why we have to change the compensation piece so that it is more appealing on that part.
Okay. Because I'm apparently from the study that you did, the teachers that we have who are contractors are happy, it seems, working with us. So it would be nice.
It would be fantastic.
I would like to know if it's possible to transition them. And I'm with you. We have to have less contractors, but we didn't have any teachers.
Right.
It was like
to January.
Yeah.
I guess, obviously we would have to have some sort of trigger, like we've got only 6 more weeks and we've got to.
We're actually, right now, we're concurrently, like those special ed positions are posted. There aren't people applying for them. So we are pursuing contractors, and we will book and secure contractors right now because a whole bunch of people aren't going to apply during the summer, right? So we actually talked to LSEA about that, like where is that magic point where we're going to, so the positions, Carla can quote me on in terms of when we posted them. But we knew the contracted positions were open. We posted them on EdJoin at some point, maybe right before or right after the April spring break is where we started pursuing contractors. And we will continue, as we have teachers that are leaving our district to go to other districts, so that creates more openings. And we'll continue to post, but it's time to pursue contractors at this point. So, I'm sorry, Linda, I didn't mean to jump in.
No, I just wanted, I'm just
I
discussing.
think work studies, we can have a comment.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about the way that they're posted on EdJoin? Why are they always posted as pool positions? Because if you're a teacher who wants to work with at an elementary school, maybe you are hesitant to apply for a pool position because you're like, well, they're going to send me to the comprehensive middle school or something, you know what I mean? But they're always posted as pool positions.
So I'll let Carla answer that one, but I think the biggest piece is that what you want to do is get as many people in and then put them where they best fit. When you say this position at IBL and this position at this school, I think that kind of limits your choice. Carla, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, definitely. The postings were posted February 17th. So we posted as early as possible to start recruiting candidates. It's a pool because we need several of them of each position. And this has been a collaborative process between the HR department and the special ed department, where we're looking at our candidates, we're screening them, we are interviewing them. And yes, we've had some contracted employees that have interviewed with us, gone through the selection process, and we've offered them positions. But then when they look at the compensation package, they decline it. I let them know we're in negotiations. They let me know, if something changes in negotiations, please let us know. They would love to be an employee here, but it just doesn't match up with the needs that they have. And then they stay as contracted employees, but the collaboration was like, if we can't fill positions, that the special ed department is looking at contracting services. But we are interviewing every time we screen and we get a good candidate. We are interviewing, and sometimes we get really lucky and get great people that want to work in the school district. And it's amazing. I mean, we have a school psychologist that accepted a position. She just got her apartment. She's moving from UC Santa Barbara up here. She just got her doctorate. So it is happening. So just hang in there. Yeah.
But there's, you know, what I would say in this study that kind of clearly spells it out is, I don't think it's any surprise to say our compensation is a problem, right? There are a couple pieces in terms of the problem, and it does spell out very specifically that very few new teachers are looking for full family health benefits. And they would much rather see that compensation be on the salary schedule.
Now, I don't want to get into negotiations,
Right.
but Carla, I mean, are you privy to what the difference is in that number so that you guys are able to discuss that in close? Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So sorry to cut you off on the discussion of the data, but that is confidential.
Okay, that's fine. I was,
Laura?
Oh, my question is, you know, this is a very big undertaking, what you guys have done. And, you know, some of the things we knew, you know, this is an area that we need to improve in. And so you just solidified everything and given recommendations. My question to you is, what's next? Like, I can hear, you know, some board members want to jump right in and start, you know, fixing the problem. Some are listening. What should we do as a board in the next steps? I know that we have policies that we need to review and see how they go into the special ed program. But what else do we need to do? Like, what are the different, I don't want to say boundaries, but maybe they are like board boundaries and superintendent and special ed director boundaries. But what would that look like? I mean, instead of just not having an agenda to speak on, you know, the different program recommendations that we need.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Suzanne, do you want to chime in or do you want me to answer that? I don't know if you could hear the whole question.
What do we advise in terms of next steps, right? Both for the board and the district. Is that oversimplifying the question? Okay. Well, first, let me just talk about what I think Anjanette and I would say are essential next steps for staff. And then we can talk about sort of the board's role. I think you have to think about two things happening really in concert with each other. One is on the general education side and the other on the special education side. And I think Anjanette spoke so eloquently about building that culture of inclusion. It is a mindset that takes leadership on part of the district. And I have no doubt that there is really the leadership and the heart and the district to really make that happen. But it also requires an investment of not only time, but of resources on the general ed side to provide that training, the resources, the support that's needed to really create that culture and provide the tools you need to implement inclusive practices. I think in concert with that, though, you really need to, on the special education side, provide some additional administrative support to your director. I think that's really key on the special ed side in terms of implementation of some of the policies, practices, and procedures that we also spoke about in this study. Now, in terms of the board's role and recognizing that the board's role is really a policy-driven role, you know, I'm not really sure, I'm not as familiar, and the scope of our work did not really focus on your board policies and anything related to special education in your board policies. But of course, in your policy role and in your role as the fiduciaries, right, for the funds that the state and federal government provides for our schools, ensuring that decisions that are approved related to the budget really reflect those other commitments. Commitment to some additional support in special ed, recognizing that there's cost associated with that, and really providing the resources and the support that helps the district implement those inclusive practices and build that inclusive culture. I know that's not very specific, and you probably like a little checklist of if we just do this, this, and this will happen. That's a little challenging to do, but I'll stop there and maybe Anjanette could bring out her checklist and check it off for you.
I would say that there are some checklists. The SELPA has checklists of all the policies and procedures that you probably should review and then adopt at the local level for both use and communication, right? So you have a Google Drive with all of the SELPA policies and procedures in them, but that's what people know about them. They know they're in a Google Drive. What you need is Pacifica policies and procedures that your director and your team have developed together, so they're all agreed to them. That's what we're going to do, not just have in a Google Drive. And so that's same with the IEP compliance. There are checklists to make sure that you're checking off all the things, right? So there are also some, we'll call them low-hanging fruit ideas that wouldn't take a ton of investment of time and money and energy. It just takes getting it done and getting some consensus. Or getting it done and scheduling a time for it to be done over and over again. So I do think that there are some things in there that John and I talked about as I was writing that you could move forward with by directing the team to move forward by reviewing those. And really what's missing for Pacifica is that Pacifica has been using the SELPA's Policies and Procedure Handbook without adapting or adopting that to your local conditions. And so that is probably what really could help your people feel like they have a connection or ownership of those actions.
That sounds like a big thing. This is a big thing. So then what I'm hearing, and just what my point of view was, that our director needs help, needs another staff member there to do this stuff so he can go and train with the general ed teachers, because the special ed student needs to be included in the classroom because that's the best thing for them. And so I know that sounds really, easy or simple, but maybe, that's something we have to focus on, is the culture, and then hiring another 1 or 2 people to help with the special ed.
And we made a recommendation where we said, other places may have solved that problem this way with a director and 2 coordinators. But you actually, what we really hope you do, and when we discussed with your leadership about this, is that you decide what works for you. So maybe actually what you don't need is 2 coordinators so that he can go out and do the training. Maybe the best person to do some of that training is Jennifer or Christina. Right? So maybe you need more system support so that they have some flexed up time to do some of that work, right? We heard about how successful you've been with your behaviorist program and how important social emotional issues are still to your learners, right? So maybe you need to build capacity to provide that skill set that your general teachers are asking for. I need to know more about how to handle behavior. So maybe we need to figure out a way to make that available. I'm sure John would do great, but he might not be the best person to do that training. So it doesn't actually have to be your director. It's that your director can determine how to build that capacity with the strong team members you have. And all the way down to your administrative support staff, right? The last thing you want is to have the wheels fall off the bus at the level of, here's the pile of things that need to be filed in the files, so that when someone asks for one, we can give it to them and be compliant and not have a compliance complaint. So, looking at having your director be able to look at all of those aspects of where does my system need more, shoring up is really possibly a solution for you short term that might lead to another person long term, but that might not, just posting and then not finding anybody is not going to solve any problem.
I have just a couple of things that really stuck out to me. That was, I know we need more help. Like, I've always felt like we needed more help in the special ed and that we were under-resourced in that end. But hearing it from other people, meaning we heard it from some teachers this week, it was in the study. I think that makes sense, because then we can do some of those things that they're asking for. I think number 1 priority is increasing the compensation to the special educators so that we can get more of our own. And recognizing that's probably going to be a 2 to 3 year transition to that, but that comes in the terms of, negotiating extra stipends or extra ways for people to move more quickly along the salary schedule so that we're not the last choice amongst anybody in San Mateo County. In 2 years, I hope we have a really nice place to offer people to live, is that, we could recruit from all over the country. If we have the Pacific Ocean right here and a nice affordable 1-bedroom apartment in the back of the valley, that will be a huge advantage. So I think we're in a really tight 2 years, but then we're gonna have a little bit of strength on that end. So compensation is most important. Second is additional staff in special ed, whether that be, I think, most likely a coordinator. And then the business practices, which are kind of how we do our business practices, HR, special ed, and business, and how those can work together. I've always known that that was an issue. I just don't know how to fix that. And so most likely we'll be reaching out to Suzanne and Anjanette and saying, could you help us establish these practices? And so that we do have a smooth running machine that's all talking to each other, and that we can really, ultimately what we want to do is efficiently use every dollar to provide services to kids. So, maybe I cut you off.
No, you didn't. I would, if I could add to that list, is also number 4, really thinking about what are the consistent practices and actions that need to take place to build the culture of inclusion. To me, that stuck out as like the number 1 highest leverage opportunity. And Anjanette, you just described how scheduling can be leveraged to support those practices. So I think that, like, that to me was a very specific action that can support inclusion. I have some very tactical questions. So those were my high-level things. On page 44, there is a line that's called sub-agreements for services, and it increased quite a bit by like $800,000 year over year. Do we know what those sub-agreements for services are?
Going to scroll page 44 so you can get the right thing. So to be honest, I do not know exactly what those sub-agreements for services are, but that goal code, 5100, is a special education goal code, which means that there are services that you are providing that are special education in function and goal. And typically what that means is contracted services for direct student support. So it could also mean that could be where your where parts of your transportation could be. So it depends on your business departments where they code the other functions and components of the billing. They do have non-public school tuition separated out. That's something else that could have been in there, right? So that 5,000 code is all things that are for special education. Because I know that you see that there's the separate contracted services, but sometimes those sub-agreements are things where we have a contractor who's doing like a time-limited thing, and then a contractor who's our employee for the whole year. And that's more considered a sub-agreement instead of a contractor. Whereas a contractor who comes in and does, I'm going to do 2 days a week for 12 weeks of extra assessments, that's maybe more contracted services. So I did not get a list of those specific items, but I got a list of the total buckets of dollars.
I would imagine that 5100 would include all contracted folks that cover our teaching classes. I mean, we'll check.
Speech specialists and so your speech, your psychs, that's what I would expect to see in there if I did get a line by line.
Right.
Yeah.
That's more like small.
Yeah, so it would be great to better understand that, because that to me, if contracted services, grew by 250,000, this other one grew by 800,000, and so that would be a bigger kind of concern. But it sounds like there might be some contracted services in there. The second question that I had was, in the document, I don't know what pages, but you highlighted the higher number of certain types of staff in the special education program: school psychologists, behavioral specialists, and occupational therapists. And I'm curious to understand, is that Is that related to the types of student and student needs we have in the district? How would you characterize that?
Well, I think that it's a foundational part of how we do studies is doing some comparison of similar demographic districts. But no matter how similar things are, until you get down to that student level need, you're always comparing sort of citrus fruit to citrus fruit, not necessarily apples to oranges, but we might be having lemons and limes and oranges, right? So I'll pick on your behaviorist program is a perfect example. In many, many districts, the behaviorist title is restricted to someone who has a license or training in behavioral science and is either on their way to getting, for example, a BCBA licensure. People who often have, for example, a master's degree with additional time and training programs to get them that behaviorist title. Your district has been super creative and has built the behavioral capacity of the staff that you've had who've been committed to your community and committed to your schools. So they don't necessarily have the level of training or length of school time that someone in a different district is. So I might be comparing someone who in one district is someone who could be a behavioral supervisor to the number of people that you have here who are doing hands-on-the-ground behavioral support, right? So the cadre that Jennifer and Nicole are supporting are people who were previously, for the most part, your classified classroom teachers, classroom instructional assistants, not teachers, instructional assistants. And so they have been elevated through opportunity, time on job, and additional training to learn those skills to help students be successful in that general education environment. So you call them behaviorists, we counted them as behaviorists, but in another district, that I'm counting different things, probably. So it can really depend on, right, we don't get that level of detail for our comparable districts. We just get a number, how many behaviorists you have. So that per pupil amount may look different, more rich in one area or lower in that different area, but you've perfectly designed a system to meet your students' needs with your resources that you have. So for a school psychologist, often we see that as school psychologists become employees, that they are able to actually provide a broader range of service. So you can have more children per psychologist because they're available to do consultation and they're there in the lunchroom, and it becomes, you get more bang for your buck out of someone who is your employee, part of your fabric. A contracted service provider typically says, these are the 5 students I'm going to assess and the 1 student I have to do counseling with. And so I come in and I do that job and that takes 40 hours and that takes 40, right? Each student takes, and then they're done. They don't talk to anybody. They don't give some advice to a teacher. They don't go and do an observation because that's not part of their contracted work. So even when you might have more contractors, you need them because they're doing 5 students versus 15 student things. So again, the counting of people as if they're beans who are serving children as if they're beans is a way to do a study, but it doesn't necessarily, when you get down to the ground floor, that's why we need to talk to the people and interview them and go see what's happening. Because these 5 students, although they all take up the right amount of time to do those assessments, one person who is an employee might have been a more effective way to handle that problem, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a very insightful background. And I wasn't concerned about it, I was just wondering about it. The other wondering that I have, again, not a concern, but a wondering, is the high parent referrals, or the higher percentage of parent referrals versus comparative districts. And I'm curious, again, just to get feedback on better understanding that. Like, on one hand, the document described, parents not feeling like their students were getting what they needed in the general education classroom. There might be another explanation of maybe that's like deep parent and school engagement where parents feel comfortable kind of communicating like that to the district. I don't know, but I'd love to get some feedback on that and where else you've seen higher rates of parent referrals.
Well, that's a really nuanced answer, and I might need John to participate a little bit too, because I know that he is embarked upon a year-long rebuilding of the trust and communication with the parents in your community, going back to the January when you had 5 open positions, right? So this challenge for your community of finding, retaining, and having classroom educators is not a new one. It's been a multi-year problem that sort of had a spike where you had some real challenges. That spike, although your parent community trusts you and loves you, that spike was a pain point. And so I think you're still seeing the after effects of both that spike and the after effects of the spike that everyone is seeing with COVID. So, there's really, I sort of feel like 2 camps around COVID. There's the, learning lost, and I'm so far behind, and I need to get caught up because I missed 2 years of learning. And there's the, we learned so many different things, and maybe we have some learning delayed, but learning delayed compared to who? Everybody else is also in the same place. And sure, we have some families of privilege who may not have had a single moment of lost learning opportunity. But I sort of feel like we have those 2 sort of mindsets. And as a parent, I just sort of totally understand both of them, right? We learned how to cook, and we did gardening projects, and we did all these things. At the same time, I didn't learn math because I don't know algebra, right? So I feel like the whole United States is experiencing this spike of parent referrals because they're worried that critical times of exposure to reading and math have been lost. And there's just no way to, mitigate that fear in like a blanket sort of, don't worry about it kind of way. And our threshold for having to assess is very low. If we have a request, we really are supposed to figure out how to make that happen. So in this time of post-COVID, everyone is seeing this tremendous spike in requests for assessment. And when you assess 100 students, you're going to find 15 students who probably have some sort of learning need. That's statistics. And you might find even more because they are going to be delayed for their age and grade if they didn't get exposed to things that they missed during COVID. But I also have confidence in our students and our educational systems that we're all going to get there. We're all going to get back what we lost. And I think that trust building and communication that John has been working on, and improving your basic teaching and improving the interventions and having that data from iReady that says, no, I'm working on that, we're making progress, are the things that will help your parent community feel stronger and more connected and more served. And that is also a thing that will take time.
The very simplest way, and you've brought this up in other times when we've talked about increasing time or supporting everyone, is so I just very simply say if the only tool you have is a hammer, every issue is going to look like a nail, right? So special ed sometimes seems like the only game in town. Mm-hmm. We need to make sure, it says throughout the report that we try many things, but we don't do so consistently across the district. And I think that's kind of the point of what's good first instruction, and then what's the intervention that we provide.
That was a great answer. The last thing you said piqued another quick question. Based on what you said around COVID, the 2 camps, the learning loss, do we expect to see more students with IEPs next year? Like, it sounds like there was maybe a large increase in referrals across the state and across the board. So is that 6%? Are we expecting that to be significantly higher?
Yeah, and I think that Ann Jeanette's eyes kind of popped out of her head when she saw our numbers for this school year, and the amount that became eligible for this school year. But kind of backtracking a little bit, it was clear that last year we didn't start our kind of assessment process. We started a little bit late, so we had a lot of students who were sort of begun last year, finished this year, and we established the IEP this year, and it kind of spiked the numbers up. So I would expect to see more a continued increase in referrals. I think a huge piece is just the inconsistencies that were pointed out as far as interventions and like SST process, and sort of one school may it may be a quicker, march to assessment versus another that has, another set of interventions that they put in place, and they may have 3 or 4 SST meetings to chart that over a longer period of time, rather than, a shorter period of time and then an assessment. But I just think in general, I would expect to continue to see, not a huge one, but just an increase.
And I would hope that you see this sort of, sure, there will be a little bit of an increase, and, going back to that very first slide in the PowerPoint, you were already a little bit below the statewide average, so it's not like you were over-identifying students prior. But even if you have this continued small growth, at the same time, if you're beginning your interventions, hopefully that those will catch more of those students and intervene early and prevent those families or those teachers from feeling like they need to refer. And I know that you guys have invested in some really great programs for early reading intervention that really are really evidence-based to show that they will prevent the further deepening of reading challenges, or possibly even prevent the development of reading difficulties and disabilities. So you've got the right tools in your toolbox. We just need to put them, and they take time. So you're sort of in this. The good news is there is funding right now for some of those COVID recovery learning activities. And so I know that John is connected to the SELPA to have some additional resources to pay for some of those things as well.
I was going to say, the other thing we might see are less exits from special education, meaning less students have met their goals and, don't need special education anymore because of what we've just experienced. So perhaps students staying in special education and needing an IEP and services longer than before.
Thank you. Other questions?
Anything else?
I think their questions covered everything, but it was nice to see the contractors most of the contractors we do have were devoted to the children, devoted to the job, and not the passing through attitude that some people worry about. And also just to thank everybody that works with the special ed.
I do think that the study did a nice job of pointing out some strengths in our district, and you don't enter something with this without the intention of airing the parts that need to get fixed. So I appreciate the gentleness that you provided in terms of that, and the level of detail was really helpful. Suzanne, do you want to have any last words?
No, I just want to thank you for the opportunity, and Dr. Olson, it sounded like you might invite us back, and we'd be thrilled to help with implementation of some of these recommendations. And again, appreciate your partnership.
Yeah, thank you both.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here with you.
The next part of and we're certainly welcome to let Suzanne and Jeanette depart if they'd like, is the second part of the agenda is that we wanted to have a discussion about our COVID numbers are up, and one of the trustees asked that we consider holding our meetings virtually. And so if we chose to do that, we would need to pass a resolution indicating that it is not safe to hold meetings in person. And so this is your opportunity to discuss that.
So my question is, if we make it virtual, does that mean we can't come in here at all? Like, I think what Laverne was trying to say is, as a precaution in case somebody gets sick, we would still have a quorum because they could participate from home. So is it possible to have a hybrid of, instead of, whereas, if we have in-person meetings, if someone can't show up and wants to show up virtually, they have to give their address and it has to be beforehand. Is there a hybrid type of meeting that we can come up with?
So it's not my recommendation that we hold a hybrid meeting. I think we certainly could accommodate. So the challenge is is that if you're going to be at home, to follow the regular Brown Act, is that we have to basically know by Friday in order to do that. We could always hedge our bets and kind of prepare for that, but that does include that your address is listed on the agenda. The second part of that is that you would have to invite people into your house to come and be a part of the meeting if they wanted. They wouldn't typically do that if you have COVID, right? Like nobody's gonna. I have COVID. Come watch in my house. So
Thank you.
The way the law is written, the resolution essentially says that we have to say that it's unsafe to hold it in person. And so it doesn't really permit us to do virtual and in person, because how can we say it's unsafe, but half of us are going to be here and half of us are not? So it's not about will we be able to hold it or not, it's about whether it's safe or not.
So my question is, to follow the Brown Act and to have a regular meeting, we're supposed to post the agenda 72 hours ahead of time.
Correct.
So is that bringing us to Friday, or could we post it later?
We could post it later. We typically just like to do it. So we have 2 meetings left, and one of them is posting tomorrow, or no, Friday. So that's we could post as late as Sunday.
What would the 72 hours be?
It would be Tuesday, Monday, Sunday. You could post on Sunday. So if we had to make any changes on that, we could do that.
And I'm sorry,
It's outside. Okay.
So my concern is that, we can guarantee that all of us are going to be here or not. And we have, what do we have, 2 more meetings?
We do have 2 more meetings.
2 more regular meetings, and then is there another special meeting in there? No,
Believe it or not, on Wednesday the 8th, you have a Wednesday off. Oh, yay. I think your child's graduating. Oh, no, she's graduating on Sunday. So we have the next meeting, which is LCAP, some budget things. It's the public hearing version of that. The public hearing version has already been posted because you have to give a 10-day advanced warning on that one. We could have the agenda, we could say to the, let's see, I'm trying to think. We could say to the public that the agenda will come out on Sunday. Just be very transparent about, we want to maximize our ability to see how many people are here and give people the advantage to opt out 72 hours in advance. There were a few instances where trustees couldn't make it, and it's because we did post on Friday, and on Monday they were ill, and so we weren't able to change that one. The other part is that if we ever got stuck that we didn't have a quorum, there's nothing, as long as we get it done by June 30th, we can meet that requirement. So I think I wouldn't, if on the 15th we only had 2 people that were able to come to the meeting, we would say, let's reschedule that for the 23rd. It's not an ideal situation, but I think that also allows us a few more options.
Mm-hmm.
Other thoughts?
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, you finish.
I just want to make a point to the public that, when there's a teacher or a staff member who has COVID, there's a substitute that can go in. As board members, we don't have a substitute that can go in and take our place. And so that's why I requested that we talk about it again, because we're trying to close up the school year, and we have 2 more regular meetings left, and, you know, the public hearings. And so that's why I asked for it. Not that, you know, the new strain of COVID, we have more cases now than we did at Christmas time, or I'm sorry, the holidays. And it's not as deadly, you know, as the first COVID, so it's just, you know, it's like the unknown.
But it's very
if we're going to
contagious.
get it or not.
Very, very, very contagious.
It's different.
Personally, I understand your question. Personally, I feel like, you know, when we are asking all the staff and the students, everybody to be there in person and trying to go ahead with as normal as possible graduations, that we, you know, try to be here in person too, and not say, oh, it's too dangerous for us to come in. But yeah, you guys go ahead. You know, and I know that's not what you meant, but yeah, you got to
explain it, because that's not how I feel.
No, I know. I just personally, I feel like, you know, I would like to be here if everyone, you know, if everyone's here. And I do think we do have that 15-day window that if that did happen, we could reschedule. But personally, that's what I'd like to see, because I don't ever want to even give the impression that I would send anyone out there where I wasn't willing to go myself. But no,
That's why I'm just telling the public, you know, that's not the case. The case is that we can't have Carla come in and sit, you know, or Will if there's only 2 board members here. You know, personally, I work at a school and I take my COVID test every Monday. So, you know, if I do have it, you know, you guys won't know until Tuesday, and then I'm at the meeting.
Right. I mean, we do have, take-home tests, or we certainly could provide tests to anybody that wanted to come. I don't know that.
we could all test on Sunday and let you know.
Right.
We post it.
Right. Actually, I guess we could post by 6 o'clock on Sunday. I think the most important piece is that we're transparent with the public around this is the reason why we're doing this, just because it's our practice to. But frankly, we're struggling to get everything done anyway, so it might help us in that way. Nita, you look like you had something to say.
Nope.
Okay.
I took up a lot of time with the last, sorry.
I mean, I just sort of feel like we're at the home stretch, and let's just try to get there. But, you know, if we can wait, you know, maybe that would give us an opportunity if somehow 3 of us came up with COVID and we had to reschedule or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's so very contagious that, you know, if it hit one, it's probably likely to impact more of us. And like you said, we did have the highest numbers last week than we've had yet. So.
And I did recently get boosted, so make sure if you haven't been boosted, go get boosted.
A parent did ask that I promote the fact that students age 5 through 11 now have boosters available to them, and that's seeming to go under the radar, but they wanted me to remind people about vaccination is still a really important piece.
That piece did go under the radar. I randomly Googled and found that out. And I was like, oh, what news?
So is it possible then to hold the agenda till Sunday, 6 p.m.? That gives us a couple more days to figure out if we're going to be at home or in the boardroom.
Yep. And if anybody tests positive or really not feeling well, we're getting a lot of people that are not feeling well that aren't testing positive. Suzanne Specken was going to join us here today, and this morning we got an email from her, and she said, I'm not feeling well. And I said, we can't thank you enough for not coming. That's really very much appreciated. And so as much as we can all be above board around this is, you can announce your seasonal allergies, or you can cough and say not COVID. Do whatever you need to do on that end. But if you are not feeling well, please do not walk into any of our school buildings. That's, we want to absolutely keep people safe. You feel okay about that, Kai?
Well, I wish we had kept the mask on. I'm just going to say it. I feel like our kids would have been protected and we would have less of a spike. So that's how I feel. And maybe the coming school year, we'll consider mandatory mask again because it helps. It may have slowed this spike. If we had just finished out the school year, it would have been, probably less incidences of COVID. As far as the meetings, waiting till Sunday is okay with me. I mean, we have 2 more left. I wish there was a way we could have a hybrid so that, we wouldn't have this pressure of letting you all know so that we could post the agenda. But if we can't do that, at this point, I don't see the reason, if you're sick, don't come in. It's just, if we don't have a quorum, we don't have a quorum, and we'll, reschedule the meeting. Does that work for you?
Yeah, I think postponing it till Sunday, helps.
Yeah.
Just in case.
Just in case. Just in case you have to come in virtually.
I will actually check with our lawyer just to make sure that I'm not wrong on this one, is one of the things we might be able to do is post the agenda, and then if we hear from you by Sunday, then we could make a quick amendment, because I think that provides people the information on Friday. And so I'll just check on that one to make sure that if we could do that, that would be an ideal world. And then just make the adjustment by Sunday night at 6 o'clock if somebody is sick and make that change.
That would be good, because what would happen, let's say that, we all went to an open house and, 3 of us got COVID, and it's Sunday, 12 o'clock. And we know that, some of us might not, we might be feeling okay to tune in virtually. What's the law around that? Do we need to post it? At what time? On our door? Just the logistics of it.
Then that would just be telephonically participating. You have to be within the boundaries of Pacifica, so you can't telephonically do it from another state. And just some requirements about posting that. Again, in theory, you have to invite people in, but I also think that no one's going to come if you are sick. And then I will just check. I think that 3 people can telephonically come in. It's just, you're doing that via the Brown Act versus waiving the Brown Act rules.
And I just want to comment back to Kai. I was in Walgreens the other day, and 4 people in front of me were not wearing masks. Yeah. 1 person behind me was, and so I was doing the 6-foot. And somebody actually, a man, actually commented, kind of smirking, oh, are you doing that? Because, I'm not telling him or the 4 people in front of me to put on a mask. And then even at Safeway, on the way home from work, the majority of people around me were not wearing a mask. And so, it's, people are just tired and fatigued from the masks, but they're out there, not wearing them, out in public, so.
And what you're seeing is the shift away from, institutional safety to personal people taking responsibility for and that's a really hard shift. And there are many, many different opinions that we hear from parents in terms of could we now mandate masks, or please don't mandate masks. And this is just such a hard thing. We have about 10 days left of school, and we just want, we are very likely, we'll do a very quick COVID update at the next board meeting, but for the dinner dance, the 8th grade dinner dance, almost everyone is asking for testing, probably likely requiring masks indoors, asking for the food to be eaten outdoors. And the reason why is because the 8th grade dinner dance is followed by graduation. So you don't want to get sick there and not be able to be a part of your graduation. And we may require that because that's not compulsory. You don't have to do that. But I think if we think about how do we get the most number of kids to 8th grade graduation, which was a really big deal last year, we want to be able to make sure everybody gets there safely. So much responsibility. So everybody's okay with, we won't move forward with that. I'll look at the issue around, could we post on Friday and make any changes by Sunday at 6 o'clock? You would text me if you're not feeling well, and then we could do the Brown Act. Does that sound good? And we only have 2 more meetings, and if we have to, we can delay them. So, all right, thank you very much for the great conversation.
All right, is that it? All right, adjourn the meeting at 8:09.
Delay them, so. So, all right, thank you very much for the great conversation.
All right, is that it? All right, adjourn the meeting